Still staying within radio contact distance of my new creation myth, how about let your neurons gomble, frolic, turn them loose. What the hell, nobody knows. So ordinary people, if they in some way could follow that sort of suggestion, like turn your neurons loose. If an ordinary person in some way could literally turn them loose, all they would have done is check themselves either into a public facility, which is normally free, like an emergency psychiatric ward, or later probably the family would have to chip in and pay to put them in a private one. But see, if you know how to do it, because you're not really turning your old neurons loose, you're just kind of shifting over to another spot and starting all over. But to make it easy, I can call it turning them loose. See, only a few people can do that, and it's a whole lot of fun. Doesn't cost anything. Nobody really knows about it. Nobody can stop you. They can't tax it. When you find out how to do it, you can't do it to the point that it's no more fun. Oh, and lots of other good stuff that I don't want to go into. So, still continuing within some kind of distance, if not actual radio, at least radar sensing distance of the new creation myth, and of course some of what I've been talking about for the last few tapings that were also in regards to my new creation myth. Quite specifically, all knowledge, all information, all so-called facts at the three-dimensional level, if you will note, is always incremental, never conclusive, always extending. It would be, surely, otherwise, were it not for the possibility that I brought up last time we were taping, and that is that the primary purpose of words may not be in any particular way to convey facts, information, or knowledge, per se, in regards to what it seems to be, but could be simply to prepare people, to prepare man for some upcoming knowledge. Well, that's for you people that, since I presented it last time as a kind of rhetorical, my old ploy of saying possibly, or asking you, could you see that this might be true? For those of you that find that to be somewhat irritating, which should include most of the world, if you're listening at the old frequency, then look at this. I'm trying to offer you at least rhetorical proof. Oh, you want it plainer, eh? No problem. Plain you won't, plain you'll get. Hold the chocolate and the whipped cream. If knowledge of all sorts, all the way from what seems to be soft social science knowledge, civilized, interpersonal, emotional information, all the way from that to quite hard, objective, scientific information. Notice, none of it is conclusive. None of it. And when pressed at all, or when the circumstances are such, life does not even require that people out in ordinary life present it as such. A man can win a Nobel Prize this year in physics for some new theorem, and part of his acceptance speech, or his very next paper, will be on some basis of, I appreciate the attention, and I do believe that I have moved our particular field along substantially, but what I've discovered, my new theorems, my new equations that seem to tie up some of the loose ends that's been plaguing my particular area of expertise for the last few years, although I've answered some questions, and here it goes, everybody can sing along, I have also brought up some brand new questions. So no one, under the right conditions, or even if I were to point it out for some silly reason, that ordinary information, for somebody to say, I love you, nobody takes that seriously. You might at the time. That's one reason I'd suggest that they go through these formalities, these rituals, that you're supposed to stand up before an official with a sash or something on, a silly little derby backwards, and you swear not only that you love the person, but you will love them when? Forever. Because everyone knows you're not. If you say, I love you, let's assume that if you held a person down and tortured their nervous system, right then they'd swear, I do. But if you say, well, you're going to love the person forever? And you had them under the right conditions now that you promise not to torture them if they'll try to tell you their best guess. Their best guess is, oh, I don't know, probably not. What I want you to see is what would pass all the way from being hard scientific, objective, clinical evidence, facts, none but facts, all the way from that to things that seem to touch right at the spirit, the soul of man. No one really considers that the information, the facts, are conclusive. Now, it normally flows by, and people operate on a basis that could be observed to be otherwise. But when asked, you surely hear this, they do not take information as being conclusive. That this is not the final word on this subject. Doesn't that, you don't see that as being a kind of, I'll admit, twisted proof of the possibility that I raised, that the primary purpose of words may simply be to prepare a person, man, for new words. That it is not for the purpose of conveying any kind of specific information, although that may take place at the time. It may serve a three-dimensional, observable, pragmatic purpose. That the information of someone saying, if I were you, I would not put kerosene in my car. I'd use the pump that says gas. That could be to your benefit. That could save you money very quickly. So it is not that there is no information being conveyed, but can you consider the general, overall possibility I gave you that the primary purpose of words is not the conveyance of some specific information. It is to prepare people for some upcoming additional information. That is why it is all incremental. That's why there's no end to it. Well, that should be plain enough. Some of you, I think at times, soar so anew, see, I didn't say erratically, that at times you forget to lapse back into the old area and realize what I'm trying to point to, that your old nervous system, this is absolute partial proof. It would be enough to make the old ordinary nervous system think that is strange. If knowledge is an item, if knowledge can be in some way systematized, if knowledge, especially into the factual realm, the objective realm, is within itself conclusive, it conveys something real. To say this is a cup here, by saying that's a cup, it excludes every other possibility. And you could even say this is a cup and this is not a camera, this is not a floor, this is not a light. That this conveys specific information that could be useful, or at this particular moment it might not be of any special pertinence to you, but it is conveying specific information. That may be. What I'm saying does not belie that any more than to say that from one view the universe would be such, if we're saying, let's imagine a 5D view. If you look through here, then if we cut it down to here and you look here, whatever it is you see, it does not, the larger view does not belie what you're seeing now, just a partial view of it. So it is not untrue that there is information being used by life at the instant that the information, that the words are passing. But if that were the case, then why would not life have arranged things to what man needs to know? He would have figured out, he would have discovered, life would have made it available, life would have made the nervous system perceive certain things in certain ways, and a man here or there would say, wait, I think so-and-so. And the whole world would be sorely impressed. Everyone else's nervous system would go, hark, that's it, that's what we've been waiting for. So you can mark that one off. Now, what is love? Somebody comes up, love is like finding two shoes that match in the road, or whatever it is. And they go, ah! And so they mark that down. Or they say, what is the nature of reality? Is it no more than getting to the quark level and that's it, there is nothing else? And a guy pulls out an equation or something, he says, here it is. And the word goes, ah! Well, mark that one off. And we would finally be cutting it down, and we would know, so to speak, what's going on, once and for all. But is that the way it works? Not hardly. That doesn't give you any hint, since you didn't like me calling it almost partially, absolutely, maybe, truth, proof. A strong hint. There have been several ideas have been expressed out in the common marketplace, the intellectual marketplace. I can paraphrase or put together several that historically have gone something like this. I'm making up my own collective quote, but there's been several observations along this line that institutionalized religion, or religion, acts as a kind of protection to keep man from having to directly confront the power of the myth or of the gods. And that's what religion is for. It's not subject, should not be subject to all sorts of penny ante shots taken at it. That part of its purpose is not to in some way bring humanity in direct contact with great cosmic forces, myths, but is to protect him, to keep him from having to do it, and so he can look at it as though you're looking at an eclipse instead of directly in a mirror, so it won't hurt you as bad. Could you, now that's, religion's been one of the main areas that they've used that sort of analogy, but could you take that a bit further and see that in a particular way you could look at all present knowledge, whenever we're talking about, at any particular time, that all present knowledge, you could see it as a kind of buffer to all future knowledge. And that the reason this incremental, never conclusive knowledge, information, opinions, beliefs are always here in man's intellect and seems to be the fuel, the reason that they are inconclusive and etc. is to act as a kind of protective buffer for what's coming up. I don't mean this necessarily negatively, but by God, I sure did about to pick out a great downer as an example. What if they were going to shoot you in the morning and you weren't really sure? There's always a possibility. You hear gunfire here now and then. Every now and then you hear, oh. But what if, instead of them awakening you some morning and stick a bayonet in your back and push you right out, and you march right out there with great strides, and they're in a hurry to get over with, doing that. If they come in and they took you out and they insisted in some way that you had to do like little teeny weeny, just these kind of little steps, that so that to march, to walk from your cell, let's say an eighth of a mile even, out to the courtyard where they're going to shoot you, instead of you striding right out and perhaps take 90 seconds, if you do, just little bitty teeny, and then maybe they stop you and say, well, take the rest of the day off, and then the next day you start that same place. Could you see that as kind of being a buffer that you would never quite be sure that, oh yeah, maybe someday I'll finally be shot, but it's obviously not today. Could you not see that kind of incremental use of language? And not just language, but that which the medium of language seems to be carrying. Just the vehicle, it's not just a matter of that. What seems to be the cargo, that is the information. That the information may be secondary, although it may be useful at the time. But it is always acting as a protective buffer, whatever's being said, on some large scale, some whole tribe, some whole area, and at the individual level of what you may be thinking, what you might like to repeat when you say what kind of guy you are, what you believe, what you read and hear that you want to agree with. That all of that, you could see, acts as a kind of protective buffer for what may be coming up. Reconsider the great historical verbal notations. I did not make a list, and I don't have to stand here and do it, more or less. But think of the great ideas. If we tried to run up right now 10 or 12, or if I ask everybody, give me a sentence that you consider, or that other people consider to be of historical significance. Well, let's start. I can surely come up with a few. How about know thyself? In the Western world, that's got to be as old a one-liner that's been carried on from the heyday of Greece, Athens, Know thyself. How about, let's run into Christianity. How about, well, almost all religions, but let's take the myth of Christianity, that you must die to be properly born. How about into the Middle Ages, chivalry, duty above all. Maybe into the 19th century, freedom at all cost. That sort of thing. Give me liberty and give me death. Well, I covered some spectrum now to get on what I was going to say. That of four ideas, if I didn't exactly quote somebody, you surely caught the gist of it. That there are. You know, Jesus said things like, a man must die to be born again. I can't exactly quote it, but enough of you surely have been around Christianity enough to have heard that. Think about those terms. Were they actually for the purpose of conveying some specific, conclusive information? Know thyself. People have been repeating that for years. Was the purpose of that to convey some information that, I guess the whole thing was, the question, I think the story went, that somebody asked the sorceress or the priestess there at the temple, what's the most important thing to an intelligent, well-lived life? And she went, know thyself. So the whole thing is, the most important thing a man can do is to know himself. Is it? Is that why people remember that for 2,500 years? All sorts of people remember that. And if you took them aside and you said, how do you like that story? Maybe they're well read enough and they're just wired up enough and sophisticated enough that they say, yes, I've always liked that. I didn't major in philosophy in college, but I read that. I think about it many times, and sometimes when I see the way people operate in life, large and small scale insanities that go on, I think if we only knew ourselves better, men would not mistreat each other like that. Men would have true compassion for one another's plight, and etc. But if you ask the person, if you get their intelligence looking in a certain cold-blooded way, and you said, does that really convey any kind of useful information, something practical? The answer is no. Nobody does it. And worse than that, from the real, more complex view, no ordinary person can do it. It's impossible. You've got nowhere to look from. You've got to take the position from whence you're already standing. You're going to be trying to describe the bottoms of both of your feet forever. And you do not have a Hercules to pick you up like a Theus, which would kill you anyway, to where you can pick yourself up and look at the bottom of your feet and decide what I am. That would have to come from an unknown position. But ordinary intelligence cannot. I'm sorry, it's not fast enough to go. You can't do it. If you're going to look at your right foot, you got to stay on your left. And if you're going to look at your left, you got to stay on your right. And you cannot jump up fast enough and stay there long enough to look at both of your feet. That's what I meant by my little dramatization that the intellect, if you say, all right, I'm going to know myself. How about you must die to be born again? Of course, that wasn't just Jesus. That's in all religions, some form of that. Is that a fact? Do they actually mean, well, go out and kill yourself? And you'd say, well, no, it's a metaphor. Don't be silly. But wait a minute. These are the kinds of ideas, the kinds of information that historians, they do not have to be theologically or religiously inclined, these will be the kind of ideas listed in a book or a short list of ideas that change the world. Ideas that have survived thousands of years and are known all over this planet. And you think, well, yeah, I just never analyzed it this way, but a man must die to be properly born. That's not true. Not at the 3D level. No sane person has ever taken that seriously. No sane person ever heard that and thought, my God, what an earth-shaking idea. That is the very truth I've been looking for. Martha, bring me a pistol. Bring me some cyanide. Not that people haven't done it, you understand. But the mainstream of life, the middle class that keeps life alive through man, no one's ever done that. And don't say, well, it's metaphorical. Don't say that and pass it off. We're back to what I was pointing out to you, the possibility originally. If you're going to say that, then I could change it, which I didn't want to do, and say, well, the purpose of all words primarily is to act as metaphors. But that's pretty crude and slippery, and the way I'm describing it is actually trying to convey a certain twist on that energy. It's a certain expansion of someone being able to try and surmise that, well, from that view, all words are metaphorical. It's not that that's untrue, but the way I'm trying to point your attention, it's a bit more telling. The ideas that are considered to be world-shaking, that are historically significant, that people remember, and I tried to hit religion and politics and romantic love, is what I was intending sort of by chivalry, that and a few other things, duty above all. There are people that said that. According to the myths of history, there are men who died. They say, well, I'm going to die for my duty. Maybe. And there may be people that read that and feel their little heart flutter. And they believe, maybe I am actually descended from Alfred the Great or Richard the Lion-Hearted. And they may hear that, they may read that, and their eyes mist over. And maybe a man here or there has died for his duty. And right before he died, he even said, I'm dying for my duty. Kill me, but I'll die. Do you notice, do you observe anywhere this becoming, epidemic? Are there large numbers of people? Does the general population of the world at any time act in such a way as to give any overt credence to their support, their belief in duty above all? It inspires me to hear about somebody dying for their duty. Would you like to follow? Hey. You don't even have to ask. So the idea, the notion that these ideas are world-shaking, that they help mold the behavior and the history of man, people can say that. And at the three-dimensional level, I would not be so foolish as to deny it. Because for one thing, they have survived. People still remember that. So I wouldn't tell somebody, an ordinary person, that that's foolish. But what I want you to see is, on the basis of these ideas, religious, political, philosophical, economic, insofar as these historically significant ideas that have shaped the destiny of man, insofar as them shaping the destiny of man, where? In what acts? Well, we remembered them. Yes, but what have you done besides remember it? Well, they can say, at least by their shrug, well, I'm not supposed to do anything else, and they're correct. But you're supposed to be able to see something else if you're going to do this. That back to the possibility I offered you, that the ideas, the words, were not what they intended to, what they appeared to be, that the intent was not to tell people, well, go out and kill yourself and then you can be properly born. And don't just say, well, it was metaphorical. It could have been. But don't say that. Don't leave it there. How about on the basis? How about the possibility that all words, in their primary purpose, is to prepare men for something else? That what they seem to be doing, although they may be serving a purpose then. And if they're sane, they certainly are serving a three-dimensional purpose right then. But what if the primary purpose is not what they're saying, is not the information apparently, obviously conveyed? The ideas plainly stated, and other people hear it and go, hark, hark, hear, hear. I agree, or I disagree, same thing. Not that that's not occurring in the past and now. But what if you looked at that as that being the secondary, the trailing edge, the sub-level of that purpose of that verbal energy, and that the primary purpose is always beyond whatever the words are, beyond whatever the information is, no matter how useful, no matter how apparently necessary in retrospect, that the information was, that beyond all that, that still the primary purpose of all words, all ideas, wherever they were, but all words were simply to prepare men for the future, for upcoming words, for upcoming ideas, which will still not be conclusive. That it is a non-stop matter of incremental knowledge, opinions, beliefs. No matter how world-shaking they're said to be, they weren't world-shaking. course, you can say, well, that's a metaphor too. All right, don't drown us in metaphors. But none of those ideas are world-shaking, because if they were really world-shaking, they would have come to some conclusion. Let's see if we can twist it a little bit. How time can exist in what appears to be different zones, and yet it is existing coevally, simultaneously. It's not both of them together, not divided by two after being added, but the combination and then finding an alternative compromise. That's a sticky enough intro. Okay. On to this. It's just a little twist on what I was just talking about. If what I'm suggesting to you, that all words are serving the primary purpose of preparing men for the future, for upcoming words, for upcoming ideas, for upcoming experiences, and if indeed, as I have suggested, and most of you can see on a clear day, that life is not shrinking, life is not becoming more simplistic, life is not deteriorating, it is expanding, it is becoming more complex, it is becoming more alive. If all that be true, I was going to offer what might appear to be another kind of oblique proof and say that, well, if you had any question of what I just said, then let me put it to you this way. If man was not becoming more complex, if man was not right now more complex than his more simplistic ancestors, the gods, then answer me this. Why is it that man has stories about the gods and they do not about man? That was not just for a laugh, and it's certainly not an attack on religion or your forefathers' gods. But I have already hinted and insinuated that if I had told you my new creation story outright, that I would have pointed out the possibility, perhaps in that story, that the gods are not something which are now verbalized, more stabilized, partial killing, not an enslavement of the original myths. The original energies have had to be watered down. But what men now call the gods are looked at as either something completely out of the system, such as something was, the creation came from nothing, that there was a nothing here and then there was something outside the nothing that turned the nothing into something. That the gods either are separate from us or else we are in some way poor imitations. And I was suggesting to you most strongly, although the opposite is not exactly true, that as opposed to us being poor imitations of the gods, it's the other way around. That the gods were not something more complex than man, that we're some kind of knockoff version of the gods. They would have been a more simplistic form of life, and that you are superior, not even trying. So don't try and pat yourself on the back, anybody. But you have got to be a more complex form of life than the literalized gods. And if you had any doubt, back to where I started this paragraph, if you can see this, but you've got to get beyond local time. If that were not true, men would not have stories and myths about the gods while they don't have any about man. Think about it. Come on, this is a good kind of stuff. Because it's not just contrary thinking. It does not require that you just be a mechanical heteroclite. Because you can't just go in the opposite direction. You have to find an alternative compromise to going in the opposite direction, see. Because I say then how do you explain, I'm back quoting me, how do you explain that men have stories about the gods and they do not about us? Then you could say, well, wait. How do we know that? Then I would have to say, if I was speaking to ordinary intelligence that showed any spark of being able to move to a new area, I might say, well, wait. We have stories about the gods. And let us say that I was talking to an intellect that was wired and primed to be sort of 20th century sophisticated at least, if not with a real revolutionary promise. And it might say, wait a minute, let me tell you beforehand, I am not religious. And I consider the whole thing just to be kind of fairy tales and sort of something that nature has done to, or that man's done to try and keep himself civilized, all these ideas about gods. And I'd say, fine. But now notice, take them as fables, take them as myths. You're well read enough to know some of the religious stories all over the world. And the guy says, yeah. Now, so all right, the stories that men tell about gods, you're saying that just men either made them up or they're just driven to for the need to be civilized. They don't really exist. And the guy says, well, yeah. So the stories men just made up about the gods. Right. So far. Still all right. But notice this, even if that's true, men have never made up stories about the gods, wherein in those stories the gods had stories about men. There are none. And of course, then if I had somebody wired up still to be religious, they might go, well, that's silly because the gods were superior. Why would they have stories about us? I mean, if we're their little creatures, if they made us like a whole bunch of little, they picked up clay and like a bunch of Gumbies that they made us and threw us out there, you know, why do they need stories about us? They're the ones that made us, they know about us. Now back to what I pointed out that some of you can already get a glimpse of. Even the stories of man's gods, if you can begin to see it in a certain way, that if you got any chance to be able to think anew, this is not that far away, and it's got nothing to do with religion, but you can see that the stories, forget any kind of notion about gods didn't exist. Because you're supposed to be better than to think that, well, that's your imagination, that's not true. Sure it is. It just may not be useful, may not be conclusive, it may be outdated. But notice, if you begin to get a glimpse that even the stories of man's gods, you've just never been able to look at, you never had any cause to look at it this way, the stories that are told in churches, temples, synagogues, caves, the stories about everybody's gods are affecting the limbic system. They're serving a purpose. But the stories themselves, the words, all you've got to do is be able to have a new ear, and the words, the descriptions about everybody's gods, are a fairly sorry, simplistic lot. They are. Even whilst a particular religion may be poetically, in the crude sense, singing the praises of their great hero, their great God, recounting all of his exploits. What are most of them? Very crude, almost barbaric, simplistic, always giving life and man a pain in the ass. And then the kind of prayers about, well, but then he came along and he says, oh, okay, I shouldn't have flooded the earth. Or, oh, okay, I shouldn't have killed half the people, so... And you take that as like, well, thank you so much for, I appreciate you, no longer, at least temporarily, restraining yourself from sticking us all in the eye with a sharp stick. Thank you, thank you. It's not sarcasm. You just can't hear it. People do not normally hear it. Now, I know there are people wired up in life to be professional, card-carrying atheists. There's little parts of life's body that's always been giving the finger to religion. That's not what this is. You know that. That's not the point. But you are, since religion serves a purpose as much as any other activity that seems to be indigenous to man, a necessary ingredient and fuel. Insofar as that's true, then people do not question it. I'm not talking about the mechanical just naysaying and negative reaction to religion, as I was just pointing out, does occur. The mainstream of life, the main trunk of humanity's body within the body of life, is, and under whatever name, is religious. They have literalized the original myths. The original energy has become more stable. But in all of their stories, and if you're in the midst of it, you never have occasion to question it. One more time, not a mechanical negative reaction of, well, I hate religion, or my parents drove me crazy with it. Not all that. There is no way from that level to analyze, to see what I'm saying, that the stories of the gods themselves, whether you believe it was true or whether you took the other side that, well, hell, men made it up, so it didn't prove anything. Sure it does. You can't get away from what I'm pointing out if you begin to see it. The stories of these great, more complex, supernatural creatures, the stories are a detailing of a life form much more simplistic than you are. Now, I know that they seem to have all these great powers and they can fly through the air, and instead of just killing one person at a time like you could if you had a pistol, they can kill 100,000 according to these myths. Well, we're certainly not that complex, are we? I mean, so it shows that they deserve the name God, because we can't do that. Think about it. From what known, civilized, just ordinary 3D position is the ability to kill more than one person at a time, how are you going to see that as being a more complex form of existence? Is that why people are striving? Is that why you would say, if it weren't for this, that you might be out trying to live a more humane life, trying to increase your education, trying to be better read, trying to do good charitable works in life? Does any of that lead anywhere to an ability, to a new plateau wherein that you could only perhaps kill one or two people if you went out and jumped out of your car down at 5 Points or at Times Square, and you jumped out and you tried to kill people? You know, how many are you going to take before they get you? A dozen maybe, if you had an automatic weapon. Can you see, trying to live any form of a more sophisticated, intelligent life at any level, that the ability to kill more than a dozen people, like the gods can do, according to all the myths, would that be true proof of a more complex being? All sorts of things. Being able to make dogmatic, crude decisions and then change your mind. I mean, things that seem to have been self-defeating. All the stories, and it's not just Christianity and Judaism, as you people, some of you should know, in all the stories, the gods create something, then man makes them mad, and somewhere along the line, and then they do stuff like they wipe out most of the world, or they're on the verge of it, and some human says, wait a minute, let me make a deal with you. And instead of looking at it that way, look at it as somebody's own nervous system. That these stories of gods, your ancestors, that they would do something that was about to be absolutely self-defeating. Almost a form of suicide, and then some little spark, like one human trying to bargain with the gods about, wait a minute, don't kill us all, give us one more chance. Is that the sign of a more complex, superior intelligence? That the thing was about to commit suicide, and it took one of its own cells, one of its own creatures, had to go and try to strike a bargain, try to bribe it? Or else maybe just on its own, it's about to commit suicide, and suddenly it goes, I think you get the picture. It's like, well, I wonder if there's a more beneficial alternative to this. All that was try to get you to see a certain, or to try to take a certain kind of stance, because I described it, I thought, most poignantly to begin with, that if it were not true that you are more complex, that you are a superior life form to your more simplistic ancestors, the gods, whether you believe in the gods, whether you don't believe in the gods, whether you believe that man's stories about the gods are literal retellings of things that did happen, or whether you believe that all the stories of the gods are things that men's own minds made up. It doesn't matter. There's no way out of it. If it is not true that you're more complex than the gods, then why is it that you have the ability, men have the ability to make up or to remember, to retell, whichever, stories about the gods, and they did not? They were not intelligent enough. They were not foresighted enough. If they're the ones that created us, and we're in some way a bad reflection going downhill, a cheap knockoff of them, they would have had some kind of stories about us. They would have sit around and laughed among themselves like, did you ever see these things I create over here on that little planet over here? And there'd be stories about it. There'd be jokes about it. They'd have their own kind of little myths. Of course, they wouldn't take them seriously, would they? since they were superior creatures, but at least they would have stories. Like, can you believe what I've done? Or I just kind of did it halfway to see what happened in Jesus. There are no stories. The gods have no stories about man. Well, I'm going to leave it there, because it's much more than the words. It is a kind of proof that belies it's just not possible in any way to three-dimensionally deal with that. But it's kind of neurological fun that I was encouraging you again when we started this evening. Trust me, that's a lot of fun if you get a grasp on that. And then it just explodes, and it's like you had one new balloon at a party and you played with it so much it blew up and it's gone away. So as soon as you see it, you know, it's kind of gone away, and it's like you got to have another fix. But you know, we'll be here, meet again Friday, and I'll try to do it again for you. But it's to see that sort of thing in here. It's not out there. And it's not having anything to do with your old intelligence's idea of what gods were. But to see that that is just obvious. It is proof of a lot more than I said. It's proof of everything, everywhere. But of course, I've tried to narrow it down for you. That is proof of almost everything. The fact that men, all men, educated, uneducated, literate, illiterate, all men have stories about their gods. But nobody's gods has any stories about man. And I just told you why. They were not smart enough. They were a more simplistic form. They just didn't have any stories. Not about us. What's the stories about the future? Look at these attempts of people right now to do the future. Forget about the soothsayers and the Gene Dixons and the Nostradamuses and the Evening Stars and the National Enquirer or whatever. Science fiction. Scientists themselves. Well, I think that we're going to discover such and such. The world of prediction is a world of heartbreak, folks. I mean, if you're looking for a job, go ahead and be a weather forecaster or a freelance economist. I think you could list yourself as a world-famous economist and probably be sought out to make some little quick bite, some comment on the local news. And I don't even know who's ever going to check to make sure that you actually are. If you say, well, I'm a doctor of economics, who the hell is going to bother to check? But anyway, save yourself some grief. The point is, there is no predicting going on in the 3D world. I know people try. But there is none. And so I'm suggesting to you, the gods could not predict. If there had been the gods, like your nervous system wants to believe on a warm day when you're frightened, when you think you are getting too close to the killing field, to the killing post, but the gods couldn't predict. That's why they didn't have any stories. They couldn't predict what was going to happen. If they were superior, they could have predicted, and they would have stories about man. But they didn't, because you are more complex than they were. See if you can tie that to something else I was mentioning, that a real revolutionary myth cannot be personalized, that it will be destroyed if you personalize your own myth. And you got to have one, finally. And of course you can't talk about it and you can't define it. But tied to that, I was going to point out also that what this results in, to be involved with this kind of activity, is there is never any sort of mortal example or hero. It's not possible. Which, of course, among other reasons, cuts down on the general popularity of this kind of activity throughout the years. But there is no such thing as a hero. There is no example. Which is, I'm sure, somewhere back within the realm of ordinary intelligence's definition of I hate to keep saying insane, irrational, highly unlikely. Or where are you from, Bub? Where'd you get... It's just not possible, right? Think about it. If the little pieces that you're picking up, like tonight and over the last few meetings and on your own, if this begins to come together in a new neural pattern, then you see, not only does this never have an example. If you think that religions in some way were connected with this, I can tell you, Jesus, Moses, Buddha, Muhammad, all that, if they existed, anybody involved with this, they're nobody's hero. If they did exist, they existed just like it was said. If those stories are just right on the money. I mean, if you had Jack Anderson or Bernstein and all those guys, if they were there taking this down, I don't care. I'm going to tell you what, people involved with this back then, now, tomorrow, they're not impressed. They're nobody's hero. They're certainly not an example. But not because that they did something wrong, not because they didn't know how to do it. But if you begin to see that life continually is in a state of advancement and extension, and that life itself, what seems to be the improvement of intelligence, if not behavior, but in intelligence of humanity is a matter of incremental growth, then the thing is, there is no mortal example, there is no completed model of man yet to be. So how can you have an example? The true paradigm of man, the real completed model, the final version, is forever yet to be. So there can't be an example. Now, to keep the kinds of energy flowing in the body of life, everybody has some sort of hero. They don't have to be religious. They do not. The people involved do not even have to be literate. But nowadays there is enough electromagnetic energy flowing around, if not printed, that illiterate people in our midst, in the jungles of New Guinea, people have heroes. Further removed from the world of electronic media now, the people still may have some heroes that were locally based, their ancestors in some way, some great chief from several hundred years ago. But here people have heroes. People have heroes that are movie stars, which other parts of life's body out of the mainstream can laugh at. How in the hell can you have? But everybody has heroes. The nervous system. But forget the word hero, it has to do with the intrigue of energies that your energy system imagines to exist that would be complementary to yours if you were, as your energy system says, was more like theirs. That's a hero. That's an example. But this, once you see it, there is no such thing as a human example. It's no offense to anybody. It's no offense to Jesus or Robert De Niro. It's just, there is no an example. If you start off a new building site, or what I continue to refer to as a real revolutionist, can have no example, not because he's mad, not because he says, well, I don't like those people. Nobody is an example, including himself, because he's not finished. An example would have to be the completed model. You would have to take General Motors and GM and Chrysler and slap them around and say, look, enough of this. Here is the way a car is supposed to look. This is it. And the gods come out. Creation itself, and once and for all puts out the automobile, whatever it is. Don't make me describe it, because if I do, I'm lying, because I don't know. But the car that gets 42,000 miles a gallon, never depreciates, never breaks down, will take you anywhere you want to go, plus will have sex with you if you're desperate, everything, plus you can eat it. It would only be then that the car manufacturers would go, my hero. Now we have an example. But it would have to be literally the last word in automobiles. There is no the last word in the human yet. Jesus wasn't it. Buddha wasn't it. None of your ancestors were it. They were more simplistic than you are. But I was going to point out that there is a wide difference. I'm not trying to convert the converted by any means, but there are no heroes in this. But look how far removed that is from all the religions. It's not the people in the world are foolish. Are people pursuing less than the institutionalized religions? People walking around following gurus and cults throughout the ages, and always they have icons, they wear pictures. The whole point of the thing being, or the symbols, the icons of Christianity are literally walking around with some guy's picture in a locket. The point being is this, whether they analyze it this way or not, what they're saying is this person, or in Jesus' case, or they might believe this supernatural person, but they're saying this person is what I want to be like. Or this great master, this picture we have of Yogi so-and-so, I carry it next to me to remind me that that's what I want to be like. Now that's part of what keeps life together. That is an important part. It is secondary food, at the very least, to the majority, to the mainstream of life. But to this kind of activity, there is no such thing, because you're not trying to be like anybody. The only way this works is you got to be like something that's never been. And it's much more complicated than any idea that you or your peers may have had about any hero that, yes, that's what I want to be like. There is no. It's a blank. Whether you know or not, you're not trying to be like anybody. You're not even trying to be like, of course, I grant you this is what is actually being said when people say that what I want to do is just be me. Yeah. And you don't have to be on the Broadway stage singing like Eartha Merman does, I want to be me. But when people say I want to be me, or I want to go through analysis, I want to quit being driven by unconscious traumas, what they're saying is, I wish that I could go on and move into the blank area. Because they're not saying, I wish I was more like Buddha. I wish I was more like Moses. I wish I was more like my dad. They're wanting to be, which is not just individual, it's life growing. What they're actually saying, the energy behind it is boy, I can't wait till tomorrow. Or boy, I wish I was really more of whatever I'm going to be. But of course they can't. They're living as fast as they can. They're living exactly the tempo that life dictates. It's only the few people doing this that try and run faster. Try and do that which life does not require right now. I was just going to point out how far removed, again, if you needed it, not trying to convert you, how far removed this is. Everything else, everything, not just religion, but everything else has some mortal, whether it's alive or not, but some mortal example, some paradigm, even in the world of science. If you said that, well, I am a physicist, or I know a guy's a physicist and he's an atheist, he's not impressed with sports, he didn't keep up with sports, he's got no heroes. He does. He's after his PhD. The paradigm is when they give you a doctorate degree, they are saying that you are now a living paradigm of this institution. That you constructively know as much as this institution. You are a living example of the physics department in toto. The physics department, in fact, the whole University of Harvard. That's what a PhD represents. Nobody would do anything unless there was a living example, whether it be still alive or not. What I mean is a mortal example. They would not try to do it. Everybody has a hero. The hero could be more institutionalized than individual. Most people have individual. That even if you grabbed a scientist in the middle of the night and you shook him right quick, especially if he'd had a few drinks the night before, and say, come on, don't you have a hero? You might have a guy that swears he never watches TV, and he has real thick glasses, and he carries pencils in his pocket and all that. And he says, I only live for knowledge and science. I believe that if you tickled him right quick in the middle of the night, or you grabbed him and you said, wake up, you bastard, who would you really like to be like? They'd say, John Wayne, Bubba Smith, Mike Tyson, don't fool me. But in this, institutionalized, even though this is not institutionalized, but notice, there is no hero. Because there is no mortal example. The completed human, the paradigm of being intelligent, is forever yet to be. So you can't have a hero. But look how far removed that is. Nobody else, unless they had a hero or an idea that there is a known paradigm, why would you attempt to do anything? The hero, the example, at one level, represents the possibility of completion. You could say that if you're going to go on travels from here to the capital of Florida, then you believe your hero is Tallahassee. And you believe it's there, or you wouldn't go. Why would you go on a journey that, yes, what I want to do is visit the capital of Florida. So your hero is Tallahassee. The paradigm of your struggle is the arrival in Tallahassee. The example of success, that yes, I'm a well-traveled person, particularly going from wherever I am to the capital of Florida. Then that means that success, the example of your life well spent, was you being able to get to Tallahassee. There is no Tallahassee in this. So then you're left with that kind of question about, well, why in God's name not you put it that way? And I think about it again, which I hadn't thought about in a while. Some of you said, why in the world would anybody do this? There is no hero. There is no example to be like. We got no great leader. We got no founder. In fact, the more I see and the more you suggest that everybody I thought was somebody that I might aspire to be or at least learn from, you keep saying that they were, compared to me, were more simplistic. Why in the world would anybody do this? Of course, there's an easy answer. If you got to, what choice you got? Case closed. Enough of that. Let me point out, there is really, I can put this, I could have talked to him a long time along those lines, but there is an absolute duty when you're doing this. Once you begin to understand it all, which don't worry about whatever that means. Once you can't quit doing this, we'll say that's when you understand what you're doing. Once you realize you can't stop doing this and you no longer not only do you no longer not care, you don't ever think about it, all right? It is your duty to exceed your ancestors. It's your duty. That's what you're doing this for. I was going to drag that into 2 or 3 other areas, and since we're out of time, I'll just pick that up next time we're taping. But it had to do with, to give you a teaser, where I was going to take it, you've got to do better, but from no known position. You can't get involved with, well, how do I know if I'm doing better? You just got to do better, that's all. You have got to excel past where your ancestors, the gods, were. You have got to exceed them. You've got to do better. And I'll leave you the 48 hours for you to try to, if you insist on falling back to your own level and think, well, not only can I probably not do better, how would I know I'm doing better? How could you prove that? Especially the gods or ancestors have been gone thousands, if not millions of years. And some of them even, hell, fortnight. Well, if we don't lose our sponsorship, we'll be back here Friday. And I'll tell you how. It's always a cheap threat, you notice, for a TV show or something, for them to say, well, they give you those little teasers about on tomorrow's show or next week's show. Some of you wonder, how are we going to actually cook? How are we going to prepare zither fondue? You probably think it's impossible, but tune in next week and we'll show you how. Hell, they could die. The show go off the air, right? We got to go. See you next time.